In August of 1914, the war had reached France's borders, its soil trampled by the thousands of soldiers marching across the field, its trees unrooted by the destructive artillery. The age of the horse and its rider making way for lead and automation. August was mostly marked by French defeat as the Germans von Schlieffenplan sent the German invaders straight through Belgium, marching towards Paris at a breakneck pace. Several villages at the border were seized by the Germans as skirmishes unfolded across the Rhine. France was about to unleash a counterattack on a small border town used by the Germans as an artillery hub. The village stood calm and quiet, not giving away that it was occupied by foreign invaders. At the edge of the yellow fields stood the French army, marching its men into position. A sea of blue crept closer and closer as Germany answered the call by sending out the few troops it had stationed there. As the French main cavalry headed to position to charge the village from the right flank, General Muret called out his own artillery to set up battle formations and bombard the village. At that same time, the German artillery prepared to fire as well. The loud whistling noise welcomed the enemy artillery as it obliterated entire groups of soldiers. While being under constant enemy artillery fire, the French were finally able to fight back using their own. Buildings crumbled as they succumbed to its own fire. The French had no cover, meaning every time a few soldiers were lost, while the Germans profited from the cover provided by the buildings. General Muret refused to move to a safer location, saying the enemy artillery was too inaccurate to touch them. Instead, it was the simple soldiers that had to pay the price. With the field being targeted by artillery, the French sped up the assault to the village, signaling the cavalry to breach through as well. As they appeared from behind the trees, they traversed the wide fields in a matter of seconds, nearing the smoking remains of the once lively village. The Germans rolled out its machine guns and Jaeger infantry as the French had already reached firing distance. The bullets fired shredded men on both sides as hundreds fell to the ground. Eventually the Jaeger lost too many men and fled from the left flank. But on the opposite right flank, the horse units ran into a disaster as German rifle infantry opened fire on them from a close distance. The town was too narrow to perform a large assault, and so the French were forced to use their pistols. The horses were large targets, and it did not take long before the retreat command was given. They left a trail of death behind as a lost panicked horse still ran over the field with its dead rider still tangled up. Despite a terrible outcome, the French were able to break through the left flank, where the German forces had retreated, leaving their equipment and weaponry. As the village was not seen by the Germans as an important strategic area, a full retreat was given. The infantry at the village borders could not escape in time as the French had closed the distance. General Muret's units also had reached the village and lined up to fire at infantry stragglers. A German machine gun team hoped to surprise the general by setting up position on the main road through the village. But Muret had part of his unit surprise that team from the side. As the town was now almost deserted, only holding a few artillery positions, the French sweep the town clean with swings of their swords and salvos of their rifles. They also reached the artillery's position, shooting them in the back as they fled. The equipment was heavy, and many rather deserted the heavy guns, handing it over to the French in order to save themselves. The German commander who stayed to oversee the retreat got surrounded, and his unit was wiped out quickly. The village was once again in French hands. In the darkness of the summer 1914 battles, there was sometimes the light of a slight victory, which eventually would vanish by the overwhelming German force.